Just days after the primary election, the next big political battle between labor and business is already taking shape in the city of San Diego. The so-called Competition and Transparency in City Contracting Initiative is likely to be one of the most debated measures on the November ballot. Joining me to analyze the details of the proposed ballot measure are David Rowland, editor of San Diego City Beat, and Andrew Donahue, editor of Voice of San Diego. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
I left out the .org, voiceofsandiego.org. Okay, so let me start with David. What would the Managed Competition Initiative actually do?
Well, it would allow more and easier outsourcing of city services to the private sector. It would also repeal the city's living wage law, which has been on the books for about 5 years now, and was very hard fought and kind of a big milestone for economic justice advocates in this city. It would essentially ban PLAs, project labor agreements, that are agreements between a government and labor advocates.
But Andrew, the primary election is barely over. Why is the measure being proposed so early in the next election cycle?
Sure. Well, you heard Dave just list off all the things that are actually in this bill. I mean, in this initiative, it's a powerful cocktail, really, of all sorts of union or sort of pro-business, pro-contracting measures. So you just have a really, really powerful mix of things at stake, and so there's a lot of people playing really hard for it right away.
Well, San Diego City Councilman Carl DeMaio leads the efforts to gather the necessary signatures to qualify this initiative for the November ballot. So we asked him what motivated him, and here's what he had to say.
We need to start looking at new ways of doing business, and the best way to do that is to open city services up to competition. By having the power of competition or competitive bidding on city services, I think city employees will be forced to renegotiate high-cost benefits, such as pension benefits, that are just not sustainable, and they'll have to learn new business practices in order to win the competitions. That's, I think, going to be a critical element of our fiscal reform package if we're to turn the city around, having a real competition program in the city's budget. Voters overwhelmingly passed Proposition C in 2006 to require the city to use regular competitive bidding on city services, with the exception of police and fire. And so 4 years have passed. Not one city service, not one function, not even one taxpayer dollar in the city budget has been subjected to managed competition under Proposition C.
San Diego City Councilwoman Marty Emerald is an outspoken opponent of the proposed measure. So we asked her why she's against it, and here's what she had to say.
The intent of this is to make outsourcing easier for big businesses that want to cash in on tax dollars. And the way to do it is to eliminate the cost or cut the cost of labor. And so it would be about eliminating the living wage ordinance. 5 years old here in San Diego, very successful, and a way to help lift people out of poverty and give them a step up toward the middle class. They're paying $11 an hour plus the equivalent of $2 an hour for health insurance. This is not exorbitant. It's not a giveaway. It's paying what we think is low end of a living wage to people who work very, very hard for this city. And to take that away is greedy and it's mean-spirited. And if that's what they want to do, just say it in the ballot initiative. Make it the living wage repeal initiative. But don't couch it in terms of transparency and open government, because it's neither.
So Councilwoman Emerald says that the title is misleading. What do you think?
Well, almost everybody who's looked at this thinks it does repeal the living wage, and Carl DeMaio, who we've seen speaking today and for years, is never really quiet on anything, and he seems to be very mum on answering that specific question right now.
But it's interesting that the voters already approved Proposition C in 2006, which requires city jobs to be outsourced for managed competition. So why hasn't that happened?
Well, it requires the city to set up a process where set up a competition between city departments, labor or employee units, and the private sector to see who would win those jobs. But the reason it hasn't been fully implemented because it's been bogged down in negotiations between the city and the labor. There are a lot of explanations for why it has been bogged down. Some people blame former city attorney Mike Aguirre. Some people blame Jerry Sanders. Some people blame the unions.
But it's bogged down.
But it has bogged down, yeah.
Okay, but Councilwoman Emerald says this isn't about labor, union versus non-union. She says that it's about what's good for the community, a living wage, paying health benefits. Is it possible to have competitive bidding for city jobs and a living wage?
Yes. Yes, it is possible to do that. If you set up a playing field set up the competition so that you keep your living wage and you require the private businesses that ultimately might win contracts, you require them to to pay a certain wage and supply certain health benefits. Yeah, it's certainly possible. This is really ideological. Carl DeMille will say that it's really about saving the city money. It could save the city money depending on how many services are outsourced, how little you pay those people who will ultimately do that work, and then the more jobs you cut from the city employment roles, the lower your pension costs are going to be in the long term, certainly. But I think he overstates the impact on the budget. This is really about Carl DeMille. He is the Pied Piper of small government. He is a disciple of Grover Norquist, who famously said that you want to shrink government down to the size where you can drown it in a bathtub. And I think that's what this is about.
So you heard his opinion. It's about small government, but there are people saying that it's also anti-labor.
Well, it is. What it would do is ban these project labor agreements that we've heard so much about, which Chula Vista just did in June. And not only that, so you've got the repealing of living wage, and then you've got managed competition. So all these things are really striking at the heart of city employees who, by and large, are union workers.
But we've already seen, for example, that you mentioned Chula Vista, where the voters approved Proposition G, which would ban the living wage requirement, and Proposition K in Oceanside, which would make Oceanside a charter city, give it power. So how strong is labor in San Diego right now?
I think we're going to see a huge test, and those were sort of in almost secondary cities compared to San Diego, right? In Oceanside and Chula Vista. So
second and third largest.
Exactly. So not to take anything away from them, but now we're going to see sort of I think a really key battleground here in the city of San Diego, and I think that's the ultimate test to see if they can really fight this, because it isn't just a project labor agreement, it's all those other things we listed too.
Your concern that you've expressed to me is that this is called a transparency initiative, but it's anything but transparent.
Well, I just think that the more you outsource to the private sector, the less the public is able to scrutinize where their money is going. If it's just the city government spending their money, there are rules where the city has to follow in order, in terms of transparency. The more you outsource this work to the private sector, the fewer, the less stringent the requirements for public disclosure of what those companies are doing with that money.
So it's really going to be up to the people to decide whether that's what they want or not.